What comes to your mind when you hear the word South Carolina? Perhaps a squatted truck with a teenage kid in a mullet with his boyfriend in the passenger seat. Maybe a young southern belle in her complete colonial attire. A young lady who's never been profane in her life since most of the males her age are driving squatted trucks with each other. Perhaps you've been driving through South Carolina and lowered your window for a breath of fresh air and then discovered there's a freaking disgusting pig farm 10 miles away. Perhaps you were just excited to get to the next state so you can have something decent to eat on your way back from New York. 10 reasons why living in South Carolina sucks by somebody who's never lived there. I hope you guys are ready for today's video. Number 1, there are no large cities. The largest city, Charleston, barely has 150,000 people, and some of the largest cities in the state are nothing more than suburbs to other cities right on the state's border. North Carolina has Charlotte, Atlanta, in Georgia, Jacksonville, Miami, Orlando, and Florida, but South Carolina has 0 large cities. It has about 5 larger cities scattered throughout the state, but none of them reach 200,000 people. Not having a large city means that if you live in South Carolina, a lot of the comforts and almost necessities of day-to-day life aren't even available in your state. Without any large cities, it puts a huge question mark on why would you want to live in a state like South Carolina. Even people who live in rural communities at some point or another have to go to a big city, which doesn't exist in South Carolina. When somebody says they're from South Carolina, a pause and an awkward moment, then you have to ask them which of the 5 hick towns they're from, since after all, there's no large cities in the state. And then when they mention one of those 5 cities, you have nothing to talk about because all these towns are insignificant. Number 2, the food sucks. And I don't mean it sucks a little. I mean it sucks dearly. Florida has a vibrant Latin food scene. Louisiana has Cajun food. Tennessee, Alabama have their barbecue. When you get to South Carolina, there's really nothing authentically theirs. Not only does the food suck, so does food service. Eating out or finding a decent place to eat in South Carolina is pretty challenging. The restaurants suck. The employees, well, they're not in a good mood. How could they be? After all, they're selling food from South Carolina. Possibly the fact that there are no large cities is a contributing factor to the fact that South Carolina really hasn't been able to forge its own identity as a state. You'll be hard-pressed to find another state with worse dining options. Number 3, sensitive people. The people in South Carolina are very easily offended. If you tell them their state sucks or they stink, or you tell them something like, I wouldn't even want to live anywhere near South Carolina, something that simple will irritate these people and they get offended. If you meet somebody from South Carolina, just be very careful with your vocabulary or saying anything about them because they're very sensitive. They get offended easily. They're tragic. If you criticize their food or the fact they stink or have bad hygiene, anything you say about these people, they take it personal and they are very triggered. So if you don't like living around people that are very sensitive, very judgmental, you have to watch what you say, how you say it, why you said it, when you say it, don't move to South Carolina. These people are completely sensitive. You can say the same thing to somebody from Kentucky and they might get angry, but people in South Carolina don't get angry. They get hurt. Perhaps because their state doesn't really have any culture or identity as a state. They don't have any large cities. There's nothing really going on with this state. They know that their state really isn't like something they can brag about. Thus, their self-esteem is really low. And if you say something about them, they have nothing to reply. So they don't even get mad. They just break down crying. And here you have somebody crying now. And you don't even know why they're crying because you said an onslaught of hurtful things about them. As you guys know, I Uber drive in a beach town here in Florida, and I deal with people from every single state. I recently had some people from South Carolina, and they asked me what I thought about South Carolina. And I was like, well, I don't really want to say nothing about South Carolina because I don't want to hurt your feelings or nothing like that. So I'm just going to say it's not my favorite state. That's it. I didn't say anything offensive. I didn't, go out there and I wasn't specific about why. I was just like, I'm not going to answer that question because I don't want to hurt your feelings. And then they were quiet for the rest of the ride. And they're also kind of weird people in general. They're very prudent, but we'll get to that in another number. Number 4, Southern Belles. Yes, these people really are prudent. They really are refined. Not everybody, but you have this like elite group of people from South Carolina who they feel like they're still Southern Belles back in the plantation days, like antebellum type crap, where they really feel like there's some sophisticated class. You'll notice that the women still wear long dresses, like if they were, I don't know, in the 1800s. It's always hilarious when I get people from South Carolina while I Uber drive. A lot of them are very prudent. They don't really drink a lot. And these Southern Belles are more common along the coastal areas of South Carolina. But basically, it's people who they just feel like they're refined and they're aristocrat. They can't drink. The women have to wear long dresses. And they're just really, kind of uptight and stuck up and borderline snobby. They also struggle to communicate with people from other places because, after all, talking to a stranger could be taken as flirting or, there's just like a really awkward group of individuals. Like I had these females from South Carolina and I was just trying to be nice to them, talk to them so, maybe I can get a tip or something. And they're like, well, we all have husbands. And I'm like, I'm not flirting with you. I'm just asking you how your day is going. But they seemed like really uptight. Their conversations are just overly prudent. It's like they feel that they're still English or something. Of course, not everybody in South Carolina is like that, but if you spend enough time in the state, you'll run into these individuals that for some reason or another think that they're like in some top tier class, some elite status. They're just superior to everybody else. They have to overdress for everything. Like when I see these people from South Carolina, I'm like, you're in Sarasota, right? You're kind of all wearing dresses and hats. And I'm like, it's like 100 degrees and you're in Sarasota. Like there's literally people walking around downtown in thongs. I'm not sure why you look like a costume store from the 1980s. But at this point, you should probably take some of that stuff off before you suffocate. I'm like, it is a Friday night in Sarasota. You look like you're going to a freaking funeral in Alabama. Number 5, bad hygiene. Just bad hygiene in general. It's one of those states where the people kind of smell bad. They don't really wear a lot of good clothes. I mean, there's no large cities nearby, so of course they're culturally obsolete. So they don't really dress up to par. I guess they still get their clothes at the big Kmart or something. People are still wearing N1. That's still a thing in South Carolina. You'll see people wearing N1. I was at one of those quick trip gas stations they got up there, and there was a guy walking around with FUBUs. I'm like, where did this guy even find FUBUs in 2024? I mean, it's not just the hygiene. It's just the lack of culture when it comes to clothing and keeping up with things. You walk into a bathroom, it's usually in abhorrent condition. People here just don't really care too much about themselves. The lack of large cities, again, means there's a lot of small towns, people farming and stuff like that. So it's normal for somebody to stink or something like that in South Carolina. So because it's normal, I guess everybody does it. And some people do it just to do it, even though they're not working on a farm. I mean, literally, you can walk into a gas station in South Carolina and you can see some dirty white socks on your toes looking type people. I'm not much of an elitist myself, but it seems like every time I'm doing something in South Carolina or standing in a line, the only thing I can help notice is, wow, these people don't really care about themselves. And I can prove it analytically. The life expectancy in South Carolina is among the lowest in the United States, so these people really don't take care of themselves. Number 6 is crime. South Carolina is usually among the top 3 states with the worst crime analytics. Now, crime analytics, you have to take it with a grain of salt because, every state measures crime differently. Some crimes that are going to give you the death penalty in Texas might be legal in California. So every state has different metrics of crime. So when you compare crime from state to state, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But if your state consistently year after year on different lists using different metrics, South Carolina is always among the most dangerous states. If you were to combine these lists all together, New Mexico would usually be number 1 and South Carolina would be number 2. The problem is that there's 50 states, and if you're consistently among the worst, that's not by chance. So South Carolina has a lot of crime problems, and it really doesn't have any large cities that will be denoted as being criminal. It's actually a lot of small rural communities that have a huge crime problem. And who wants to live in a place that's small that has crime? I mean, it's understandable in a large city, but really in a rural community you have a lot of crime. Come on, South Carolina. Number 7, it stinks. You ever heard that song from Soulja Boy? Girl, you stink, take a bath. Girl, you stink, take a bath. Take a bath up in the shower, take a bath. Yeah, the people here stink, but so does the place. That's because South Carolina has a lot of jobs in agriculture. We're talking chicken farms, we're talking pig farms, we're talking just, if it stinks, paper mills. I don't even know what they got going on. You drive through South Carolina and you're like, dang, it smells worse than a women's prison. Driving down the interstate in South Carolina. I remember one time we're driving through South Carolina, and I don't know if it was a paper mill combined with a pig farm combined with a poultry farm, but the stink was so rotting in the air that we were almost on the edge of throwing up within our vehicle. And in fact, there's people passing by the highway, and you can see people stopping their cars to vomit when they drove through these parts of South Carolina. The state really hasn't given these people great jobs, and the jobs that they have are in things you probably wouldn't want to go near. Now, if you live in any self-respecting state, they don't allow this. But just to give you an idea, if you drive, 5-10 miles from a paper mill, you can smell it. It never goes away. We had a paper mill in Alabama like 10-15 miles from the house. We could smell that thing. But these pig farms and these poultry farms are so abhorrent that literally the smell lowers real estate values. You ever been on Realtor looking at a house and the price is like a quarter of the price of what it should be? That's because it's near a chicken farm. If you live in a self-respecting state, they wouldn't allow this. But in South Carolina, this actually exists. I mean, these things, you could be miles downwind from them, and it could literally make your life a living nightmare. In fact, these chicken farms, they even have to put them in like really isolated areas because they can't even be near towns. They're just that abhorrent. And the pig farms are even worse. If you live in South Carolina, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's just not something you want to be anywhere near. And in fact, after driving through South Carolina, I'll go without chicken for a few weeks, or pork, or whatever the smell was. Kind of reminds me of El Paso, Texas. We're placed in El Paso, Texas, where there's like thousands and thousands of cattle there. And the smell of cattle urine is very strong. Yeah, after going through there, you may not want to eat beef. Number 8, unsafe roads. Yeah, the state of South Carolina has some of the most dangerous highways in the entire country. There's a few reasons. The prime reason is probably the fact that the state of South Carolina does not care about its people, and if they die, well, it's one less South Carolina we have to give food stamps to. South Carolina is usually among the top 5 states with the highest roadside fatality rate. We're talking 22 per 100,000. That means it's actually very dangerous to drive on the roads of South Carolina. You'll notice that the roads have blind turns, unmarked. Sometimes you'll even see trees growing on the road. I remember many years ago, I was on Highway 16, somewhere out there in the middle of nowhere in South Carolina, and there was literally an entire tree growing on the interstate. Roads in South Carolina are in bad condition, and it leads to an abnormal amount of deaths. Number 9 is an ineffective state. Possibly the reason why the roads are so dangerous in South Carolina is how ineffective the state is. Probably the reason there's pig farms everywhere is how ineffective the state is. We could just go on and on elaborating on the various reasons why, but the state of South Carolina itself, like the legislature of the state, the way everything works in the state, it's possibly one of the worst run states in the country by far. And it leads to roadside fatalities. It leads to complete environmental disasters. It's a state that just isn't run properly. There's like a good old boy system that has the control there, and they kind of do everything the way they want, and it's really a free-for-all for those people. And we really don't have enough time on today's video to elaborate on all the reasons why. But if we were going to have the state of South Carolina be a vehicle, it would be a Mitsubishi Mirage with GM plastic and German engineering. It is just very ineffective in all of its composition. You could literally grab sunburnt homeless people on the side of the road in Florida, bust them all into local offices in South Carolina, and the next year the state would improve significantly because it just seems like at least the homeless people would try to do something to make the state better. I've been in prison yards that are better run than the state of South Carolina. I've never been in prison, but you get the idea. Number 10, the topography of South Carolina. You have a coast that gets hit by hurricanes and it's swampy and marshy. There are some beaches, but they're not great. Further inland, it's all flat until you get to the extreme western northern part of the state. Up there by North Carolina, there's some pretty mountains in that part of South Carolina, but it's like a little corner of the state. It's practically a flat, featureless state. It's a featureless state. It doesn't have too much natural beauty or nothing that stands out. There's nothing like, oh, did you ever see the blah, blah, blah in South Carolina? It's like, if you go to Arizona, did you see the Grand Canyon? You go to Alabama, I'm like, wow, did you see the racism? Every state has something in their topography that's like shocking, amazing. In Texas, it might be like the heat. In like California, it might be the coastline. In Florida, it might be the beaches. Well, there's really nothing geographically about South Carolina that is impressive. They have some impressive mountains, but it's only the tip of North Carolina. Carolina's like 90% more mountains on the other side of that border. So they don't have great mountains. Their mountains are very small and limited compared to the surrounding states. Arguably, even Georgia with a smaller coastline is better than South Carolina's. Can't compare it to Florida, can't compare it to North Carolina, neither with mountains nor beaches. There's really nothing about South Carolina that would make you say, wow, that's unique or special. The topography really is bland and insignificant, just like everything else in the States, except for the crime. The crime is phenomenal. All right, so those are the top 10 reasons why living in South Carolina sucks. I'm not a realtor, okay? I'm not going to sugarcoat this and the heat and humidity. No, I'm going to tell you how it is, play. I'm going to tell you, dog, this is real right here, man. The top 10 reasons why South Carolina sucks. And I'm sure the people in South Carolina will be very understanding about my brutal delivery. Thank you. You guys are splendid, really. Thank you for being so understanding.